We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point, a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this, an alternative world branched off.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of Free Association Radio, broadcasting to you live from South Central Texas. I'm Robert Phoenix. Welcome to the show. It's been a week since we last gathered together and brought our collective thoughts and identity into focus. I want us to return to last Friday's show for just a moment in time and think about what we talked about. Think about creating a solution where we begin to interface with reality in a way that is deep, profound, and nobody gets hurt. Remember that? We were talking about that. Nobody gets hurt. And all we were asking for in that moment in time was for a few individuals to turn and go in the other direction, to understand what's happening on this planet, which is essentially a planetary coup. And the planetary coup has to do with the fact that there is a system of global governance being inserted, and it goes beyond the global governance piece. It is beyond that. It's far beyond that. That's just a rubric that people are essentially led by, guided by, led by their noses by. I mean, it's really just the frame. What's behind that is a complete hijacking of reality. And reality has been hijacked over and over again, but this is a big one. This is a big sort of fork in the timeline here that we're approaching. And that fork in the timeline has to do with a new inception. There's the word inception. It's a very important word because the movie Inception talks about layers of the dream. Dreams within dreams within dreams within dreams. And this is what we are living. We are living in a realm of dreams within dreams within dreams. Who generates the dreams? How do we agree upon the dreams, the collective dream? Well, what we did last Friday is we said, hey, look, we want to have a different kind of experience. We want to break the spell of the collective trance, which is going to be creating this new overlay of the matrix, which is essentially a technocratic society driven by artificial intelligence, driven by the Borg mind, the hive mind. And what we did last Friday is we simply asked for some people, key people, to walk away. to understand what's taking place. And perhaps this has come true. Because in the last 48 hours, we've seen, actually the last 24 hours, not even that long ago, the last 24 hours, we've seen two extremely shocking events take place. Number one, we had a Supreme Court basically come to a 4-4 tie on Obama's executive order for immigration, and for Obama, that's a loss. A tie is a loss. Had Scalia been there, he would have voted it would have been the fifth vote against Obama. Obama and his administration suffered a huge setback. Huge. Now remember, Obama is a Leo, and he hates to lose. Not only does he hate to lose, he hates to lose face. And for that executive order to have not been passed, essentially, by the Supreme Court, is a major loss and a tarnish on a legacy that is getting more and more tarnished with each passing day. People are waking up. He has become the great divider. And if you are paying into Obamacare, you're going to have a rude awakening in October. That's part of the October surprise, by the way. Your Obamacare is going to go through the fucking roof. Now, remember back in the day when it was being basically shoved down our throats? You'd be able to keep your own doctor. You wouldn't have to pay for it. I mean, they were talking about this as being free. This is how it was being positioned. And then the way they got it passed is they made it into a tax. And the tax could be raised at any given time in relationship to the premiums that the healthcare providers were going to request. So as the healthcare providers raise their rates, and they're getting raised significantly, and this is happening when our good friend in the White House theoretically is leaving the White House. He doesn't have to deal with it, but you do. You're going to have to deal. So anyway, this is a major setback. This is a setback for a legacy that's being tarnished as we speak. Roughly the same 24-hour span, a major vote takes place in the United Kingdom, and the vote has to do with Britain leaving, the UK leaving the EU. This is huge. This is enormous. Why? Why? And I don't care how you spin this. I don't care whether you think that it's another piece that's kind of being given to the people so they can gnaw on it for a while, feel good about it for a while. No, this is huge because it affects the EU, the economy of the EU. They have to do all these new magisterial, they're not treaties, but they have to write new laws into effect now in England, and it's starting immediately. Immediately, the people have spoken 52 to 48. It's usually around 52 to 48 on almost any major proposition or vote. So the people spoke and the vote counted. Now, how rare is that? Just to give you an example, over the course of the last 4 elections in this country for the presidency, so we're talking both Bush elections and both Obama elections, the vote was completely rigged. And every single one of those, starting with the hanging chads in Florida and the Supreme Court voting Bush into the White House. It was the Supreme Court who decided who was going to be president. Al Gore won the election. Supreme Court said no. Actually, George Bush did, thanks to the shenanigans that took place in Florida with his brother. Then we go to the next election with Bush. Hey, guess what? He had somebody he ran against. Who was it? John Kerry. John Kerry, his Skull and Bones brother. That's right, Skull and Bones brother. And what does Kerry do? Kerry loses. He loses. He loses big time. Well, at least that's what we think. Kerry actually won that election. He won. Why? Because people were sick and tired of Bush. They were sick and tired of his Zionist cronies, but they rigged the whole thing. There were massive, and I mean massive, accounts of voting fraud, machines being tampered with, and they picked the right guy to run against Bush, didn't they? Of course, his skull and bones brother, John Kerry, who, of course, is rewarded by becoming Secretary of State under Obama because he kept his mouth shut, walked in the other direction, didn't say people, oh, well, good election, tried hard. He knew what happened. That's why he was chosen. Fast forward, let's go to the next election. That's Obama versus John McCain. They didn't have to rig that. They did not have to rig that election. Why? Because Obama was such a slam dunk. It was a slam dunk. McCain was, McCain next to Obama. I've talked about this before. Who votes for McCain next to Obama? You'd be crazy just based on appearance alone, just based on energy, just based on the lack of history that Obama had. I was dubious of Obama from day one, but that's a different story. So he wins. We fast forward again, next election, throne. For all intents and purposes, Mitt Romney wins the election. He wouldn't have been any better than Obama. Might have been worse. Never trust a man whose ears are that small and attached to the side of his head. But the election was thrown. So we've had 3 out of our last 4 elections completely thrown. We've seen this just recently with the primaries, Hillary, the superdelegates, taking delegates away from Bernie Sanders, Trump having his delegates taken away from Ted Cruz and I mean, they play it's so fast and loose with elections that it's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And you wonder why people have become cynical. So when we have a vote like this in England, we're expecting something like that to occur, and it doesn't. The question is why? Why did the vote go through? Why was it approved? I have a couple ideas around that. So the first thought that comes to mind is that the 52-48 margin was actually a lot bigger. That it might have been something along the lines of 63-37. And it was so clear. There were so many votes cast on the Brexit side that they came up with the 52-48 figure, and they had to do it. That's one thought that comes to mind, which I think is plausible, that it was much more of a landslide than the actual 52-48 number would provide and illustrate. The second piece is that let's go back to our little moment in time last Friday, where through the power of our third eye, we were, adjusting reality to some extent. And perhaps one or two of those people that we actually were invoking and calling forth were part of that voting process. Perhaps they were the ones that said, hey, let's turn the page. Let's do something right for a change. Let's feel good about ourselves. Let's celebrate our conscience. Wow, what a thought. And here we are a week later. And what are we talking about? We're talking about probably some of the biggest news of the 21st century. England is decoupling from the aircraft carrier, the sinking aircraft carrier known as the European Union. And they have 2 years in order to do it. 2 years. Now, astrologically, some interesting things have been going on. They voted on an Aquarian moon, and they voted a day after one of my favorite symbols one of my favorite Sabian symbols, which is 0 to 1 Cancer. And I know this symbol because I have it in my chart. I have Mars at 0 degrees Cancer in my chart. Let me see if I can find the symbol. I'll just remember it. At sea, a sailor on a ship lowers one flag and raises another. This is the symbol for 0-1 Cancer. This is right around where they started to take the votes. So the Sabian symbol itself talks about lowering one flag and raising another, which is symbolically what's just taken place in England. We've also had the mutable Grand Cross, which is Mercury in Gemini, Saturn in Sagittarius, Neptune in Pisces, and Jupiter in Virgo, all in this, kind of, I would say, a little distended Grand Cross. But what are we talking about here? That's mutability. That's change. That is change. So when you get four, kind of heavy-duty planets like that together, Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, Mercury being the trigger, and Gemini splitting off, right, like the zygote, it splits off. Astrologically, we have the template for change, mutability. It's right there. It's in the chart. And the moon is in Aquarius, and the moon in Aquarius in sextile with Saturn and in sextile with Mercury. Okay. Actually, it would be trine with Mercury. That's right. So the Aquarian moon brings us the energy of change, but it's dispassionate. The moon in Aquarius is dispassionate. It's kind of dispassionately radical. So there was a very cool sort of manifestation on an emotional level and on a collective level as well. So we have had two significant events happen within the last 24 hours. This Brexit piece is tremendous. Keep an eye on Boris Johnson, former mayor of London, as perhaps the next Prime Minister of England. Johnson is a Gemini. He's born on June 19th. And we've been going through all these kinds of changes and iterations, especially with Brexit, with Mercury and Gemini. So this is big. And Johnson is probably going to be the next guy in line to steer the ship of England. David Cameron sitting down. He's gone. It's amazing. I mean, just like that, resigning. Where does he go? What does he do? Maybe he can run around with Tony Blair and defend all the dead pedophiles, or all the living ones who are actually dead, but masquerading as being alive. I'm telling you, boys and girls, the times there are changing. We are in a place now where there is a wobble. There's a wobble in reality, or the reality that we know it. Okay. Now look at what's happening in Orlando. Let's kind of skip across the country. I'll revisit Brexit. Let's look at what's happening in Orlando. Just go on YouTube. Go on YouTube and look up false flag Orlando, and you will see myriads of videos that the awake and aware cross-section of our society is putting together and chronicling and cataloging on YouTube. And you will see crisis actor after crisis actor. You will see hole after hole after hole in the story. Where is the video? There is no video. No video whatsoever. You would think, again, we live in such a narcissistic, solipsistic society that one or two people would take their damn cell phones and say, I've got to videotape this. If I get out of this alive, shit, I'll get millions of hits on YouTube and I'll be rich. Because I'm sorry, that's where the mindset of a lot of people is at these days. You would think 1, 2, maybe 3 cell phones with flashes of gunfire and screams and bloody murder and this and that. Nothing. You would think that the camera would have the club would have cameras. Of course it would have cameras. Why? For security purposes? Possibly. But I'm sure things go down in clubs, in fact I know they do, that are pretty salacious. Wouldn't you want that on videotape? Wouldn't you want to be super voyeuristic and grab somebody doing something funky, weird, dark in a certain corner of your club? Of course you would. Why? Because maybe you could monetize it. Or maybe just give you a great sense of power. So you have the security piece, and you also have the Big Brother autoerotic voyeur piece, and yet there's no video. We don't see any video. All we see is a staged event. Ambulances, fire trucks, police, they're standing around. Now, there are people that say that they knew people that died in the event. Okay? It's possible. It's possible. We could be talking about a hybrid event. I was listening to Jeff Rentz talk with Jay Widener the other day, and they were talking about a hybrid event. That, yes, it could be a false flag, and yes, there could be reality actors, crisis actors, and yes, there could be people that have died. We are in a place now where they have adjusted the model. They've adjusted the model. Let's look at the last 3 big events. The last 3 biggies. I'm talking biggies. I'm not talking about what happened at the university in Oregon, which was, again, on the radar, but not huge. I'm not talking about what happened in Roanoke, Virginia. I'm talking about what happened in Paris, San Bernardino. These were events that were staged indoors. They're always indoors. Rarely do we ever see anything happen outdoors. The last time we saw something like that was very bold. It was called the Boston Marathon. And we had crisis actors. We had people who already had prosthetics. There was a drill going on at the end of the Boston Marathon. There were people that looked like they were wounded. They weren't. This is how they pulled it off. It takes a lot now. You see, when that happens, you could only get away with something like that maybe one time. Because guess what? People get their high beam switched on. And they're looking around. See something, say something, right? So all these events are now taking place in controlled environments. They're taking place inside of theaters. Clubs. We had the club in Paris. We had the theater in Lafayette last year, which I was very close to. I was just a few miles away. Again, inside, controlled. Nobody sees what goes on. Look at what happened in San Bernardino. It was inside that center, the county center, where they had been having drills for the last 6 months. I think they were having more drills than they were actually doing work there. But it was indoors, controlled. Nightclub, indoors, controlled. So they've figured out now how that they've got to have these events take place in very controlled environments. And they may have figured out that perhaps some people actually need to die every now and then. I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced anybody died in San Bernardino. Not convinced at all. I am not convinced that the guy had become a radicalized Muslim. Not convinced. And even with Omar Mateen, I am not convinced he was a radicalized Muslim. I believe that Omar Mateen was property of the CIA, that he was an operative, and that he was sent in there to do something. There's a perfect cookie crumb trail. Just follow the trail. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because there was the other guy on the West Coast who was supposed to do the same thing in Santa Monica, turned himself in, the Santa Monica PD, and told them that what happened with Omar Mateen was supposed to happen to him and wanted protection. Of course, the FBI comes in, takes him away, and SMPD has nothing to say about this. Where did this guy go? You cannot even find any real track of where he went. Is he arrested? Is he going to have trial? And come on, what's going on here? He's just gone. Absolutely gone. So we're in a stage now where these things are starting to, again, they're starting to fall apart. They're starting to fall apart. Think about this just for a second. If there was something like a really super tragic event that was visceral, and it was, by visceral, I mean real, like you saw it, and you saw it in a way that was uncontested in terms of cooperating with this version of reality. It's a very good chance you would actually have a feeling. Let's hope you'd have a feeling. You had empathy, you'd have sympathy, you'd have compassion. But instead, what's happening with these events is that I feel nothing. I feel nothing. And I don't believe it's because I'm a borderline sociopath. I feel nothing because there's nothing there. And I've talked about this before. And what happens is that we are being robbed of one of our greatest gifts: real emotion, real compassion, real empathy. And then what occurs is we start to emote in a way that is not real. It doesn't exist. We're having feelings for something that doesn't exist. After a while, what will happen is that our emotional body, our collective body, will begin to recognize that the feelings and the events are not corresponding. And here we have cognitive dissonance. And that's when people will sit around and start to rub the hair on their chin and say, what the hell is going on here? Because there is a complete dislocation between an event and an emotion. Excuse me. In a lot of ways, it's really tragic because it's our emotions that power us in a way that can be empowering. And here we have synthetic emotions or emotions for synthetic events. And after a while, our emotions themselves can become synthetic. You understand where this is going? Not only are we being programmed to, say, give up our guns, we're being programmed to experience false sets of emotions, emotions that aren't even real, which makes us less real than we were before we started to emote. Think of the level of manipulation that's taking place. Look, your emotions are sacred. Your grief is sacred. To spill grief on events that aren't real or being used in order to perpetrate a version of reality that in effect is going to be used against you is criminal. It's a violation of your sacred order of being. And this is why I urge people to look at these events from a perspective of detachment. It's important that we have to marshal some form of compassion. We have to keep it in reserve. Because if we are so dispassionate and detached, we are as sociopathically driven as the people that drive the events. Because we don't want to go in that direction either. Because then we're just as robotic as they are, and we have no feeling capacity whatsoever. So we have to have a little compassion and reserve. Because we don't know really when something actually goes live and it becomes real. And then we have compassion, then we have empathy. Let me give you another example here in a way that perhaps might make sense to you. There is a young girl. Let me see if I can find the story. It's a very, very powerful story. Some of you are not going to like this story, but I'm going to share this with you. Let me see if I can find it. Here we go. This leads us to it here. Let me give you the background on this story. This took place in Idaho recently, and there was a 5-year-old girl who was sexually assaulted in Idaho. 5 years old. And there were, quote unquote, 2 migrant boys from the Sudan who were arrested last week on charges of sexually assaulting her. They were released from the Snake River. It's an interesting phrase. Snake River Juvenile Detention Center. It says here, according to witnesses on the scene, the boys' families were seen smiling and hugging after the hearing ended shortly before 3 p.m. Thursday. They were waving their arms to the heavens, smiling and throwing their arms around each other. The 2 Sudanese boys, ages 10 and 14, were reportedly ordered by the court to have no contact with the victim, a 5-year-old special needs girl whom they allegedly assaulted in the laundry room of their apartment complex on June 2nd. They were not arrested until late last week. A 3rd boy, age 7, was also involved but was never arrested. This is horrible. The older boy, 14, allegedly filmed the entire incident. How lovely. The 2 older boys are from Sudan, the 7-year-old from Iraq. Of course, they were brought into Idaho because the plan here is to bring as many migrants to Middle America. Middle America is too white. Middle America has too many, quote-unquote, Christian values, morals, and ethics. It is time to diversify Middle America because diversity is not happening soon enough, not quickly enough. And here we go. This is the fruits. This is the bitter fruits of diversity. 5-year-old special needs girl gets raped. You want empathy? You want sympathy? You want compassion? And I'm not talking about for the boys. I'm talking about for the little girl. I'm talking about for her family. You want to put your energy and emotion into a direction that is real, at least as real as it gets here in this plane. There's an event. And these boys are going to be released again. They're released now. No contact with the victim. Like this is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Where's the rage? The outrage? And what about the boys? I mean, do we have compassion for them? I mean, do we have empathy for them? Well, in order for us to have empathy and compassion for the boys, which is very hard to do at this point, we have to go back into the Sudan. We have to look at their socio-political situation, which has been on fire for the last 25 years. We have to see that they're a byproduct of NGOs and the elites and the global government that wants to keep Africa completely in tatters, in chaos, and in such a state of disarray where the conditions are so bad that the only real way for anybody to get any kind of sanctuary or relief from their situation is getting the hell out of their country. So I suppose at a very deep level, we might have empathy and compassion for these boys because of how shitty their world was and were forced to leave their world. But that's not really where the empathy and compassion needs to go. It needs to go to this little girl, her family, what happened to her. And she's not a victim. She's a victim. She's a victim. They would like you to think that she's not a victim. That there is something, this is where the New Age thought comes in, that there is something wrong with her, that she deserved it. It was karma or some bullshit, right? But we're not talking about this. We're not talking about the impact of what it's like to bring people into any country, not just this country, any country who've been traumatized over and over and over again, who have absolutely no moral or emotional center. That's been exploded. In some instances, and I've seen, and I'm not an Islam phobe, trust me. In some instances, I've even seen billboards encouraging people to rape in Africa. I've seen the billboards. So I'm just bringing this up because if we wanted to channel our emotion for a collective event, this would actually be worthwhile, versus these other events which make a mockery of our emotion, an absolute mockery. And the worst part of it, or the worst example of it that I have seen, is when people get played to such an extent that their emotional signal is like in the red, right? You know, the impedance is so high that it's blaring. It's not even clear anymore. And I've seen this on Facebook. I've seen people I know really like and getting extremely emotional about what's happened and the injustice and the this and the that and got to take away the gun, da 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 da. And it is painful to watch. Who I thought were at one point in time kind of enlightened, aware, and awake people, and then their little emotional signal gets played, and there they are generating Sturm and Drang for something that may or may not have even existed. And if it did exist, then it's existed to the extent that it is being used against you. It's being used against every single one of us to get us to buy into a version of reality that doesn't exist, for a version of reality that they want to create for us to inhabit in the not-so-distant future. Emotion is the driver. Emotion is the key. Be clear on this. Save compassion and reserve. But whenever these events happen, and by the way, I said, you know, on a number of occasions that with this Saturn opposition, Saturn in Sagittarius opposing Saturn in Gemini, which was Saturn was in Gemini, 15 degrees on 9/11, 2001. With this Saturn opposition, I said, watch out. We're talking more about 9/11. It's becoming a more voluble topic of discourse. And I said, watch out, because we could be looking at another 9/11. And boom, we had this event in Orlando, Operation Orlando. That's what I call it, Operation Orlando. And there was supposed to be another event taking place in Santa Monica. So we would have had kind of geographically kind of a similar 9/11 scenario where those three events were spread out. And between Orlando, which apparently had, 50 people die, And who knows how many would have been in Santa Monica. We'd have been probably over 100 people. And boy, now we're really talking about the next 9/11. As it is now, it still is being talked about on those terms, what happened in Orlando, but it's not nearly as big and potentially damaging had the Santa Monica side of this thing gone through. But it didn't. It didn't. And yet we are still intensely engaged in the debate around guns and gun control, no-fly lists, and all the stuff that goes along with it. This is the jackhammer narrative that we're all going to be subjected to. And hopefully this is, I don't think it'll be the last one, but keep your eyes on 4th of July. That's a big date. Big date astrologically. Keep your eyes on 4th of July. It's significant. So why don't we take a bit of a break here? What I want to do in this break is I want to just briefly talk about a friend of mine who passed away last night. And her name is Barbara Imhoff. And I had Barbara on my show back in 2012. And Barbara had just put out a new record with a group called the Bindi Society. And Barbara was an amazing person. She was a harp player. You don't find many harp players. It's not an easy instrument to play. And Barbara was as accomplished as it gets. And she was a terrific writer and a researcher. She was borderline polymath. Barbara was brilliant. And she had a great sense of humor, extremely self-deprecating. Barbara loved life. And I was very, very close to her. And I found out today she passed away. It was interesting because I was in Santa Fe over the past few days, and I toured with a group called the Beasts of Paradise. I was kind of along for the ride. I was in transition. I had a van, and I helped them kind of road manage a series of dates, tours, or gigs rather, in the Southwest, and Santa Fe was one of the places we played. So I was actually thinking about my time in Santa Fe with the group, and Barbara played harp with the Beasts of Paradise. And I thought about our time there, our performance there, the band's performance. So she was really on my mind yesterday, and lo and behold, she passed away. So Barbara is just an incredible, incredible spirit. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to honor her by playing a couple of pieces of her music, one of which I'll play now and one of which I'll play at the end of the show. So when we get back, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get into the Brexit piece a little bit more, and I'll talk about, I'll read from the UK, the Mirror, and I'll read what they're talking about with Brexit and try to get us as up to date as possible with some of the dynamics involved. But let's listen to this. This is a track called Dayala, and it's from Barbara's Bindi Society project, and it's a wonderful piece of music. Her harp playing is really up front here at the beginning, and we'll be back in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. Here's Barbara Imhoff with Bindi Society Dayala. That was Dayala from the Bindi Society with the late Barbara Imhoff on harp. We'll play another piece by Barbara in the Beasts of Paradise at the end of the show, in closure. It's about a 12-minute track. We'll just end on it. It's a wonderful piece of music called Flickering Blue, and I think fairly appropriate. A couple of things, a couple of pieces of business. Apparently, my interview with Regina Meredith went live, and it's on Gaia TV now. It was funny because, you never know how these things go. And I remember doing that interview with her, and I did feel real strong about it. It was like both Regina and I just got in. It was the first interview she was doing of the day. We were fresh, but we also weren't warmed up, and generally we're pretty warmed up together. So I didn't really know how well I did. I mean, I felt like there have been times I've been stronger on her show, but I got some feedback from a friend. He said it was the best one I've done, the best interview I've done so far with her. So I'm hoping that that that's the case. We did another one looking forward and ahead to the fall, and that one was pretty powerful, and I could feel it. I can feel a definite difference. So I'm hoping that, sometimes we're just very critical about what it is that we are experiencing or have put out, and maybe that's just the case. Anyway, if you're interested, you can go to Gaia TV. You can check it out. It is live now. Also, we are putting the finishing touches to the 11th House Academy. And right now we're at 16 hours worth of content. Now think about this. This is 16 hours of soup to nuts, or nuts to soup, whatever they want to call it. I forget what it is. But this is from start to finish, you're getting 16 hours of astrological content, from the basics to more complex things like the draconic chart. It's all in here. There's tons of lab work. There's charts that I break down both from the perspective of couples and synastry to individuals to rivalries. You can see how I break down charts. You can understand sort of what I'm looking for, what I'm looking at, sort of a multidimensional look at astrology, symbolism, numbers. It's all in there. And we're getting ready to go live with it at the beginning of this week. So if you've ordered the course, if you've been part of the pre-orders where you've been able to get a half an hour reading, and quite a few of you have done that, know that that's coming. And if you're interested in the course, we're going to have a link up on the website here very shortly, which will allow you to go to a website called Gumroads. That's Gumroads, Gumroads. It's already up. You can go to Gumroads and you can actually download the course. Think about that. You can download the course. You can pre-order. My producer is telling me you can pre-order the course. It's there on Gumroads, Gumroads.com, Gumroads.com. You can get the pre-order there. You can't get the half-hour reading. That date passed. That was the 22nd. But you can still get it. I'm sounding like Alex Jones here. But you're going to get 16 hours plus worth of astrological information and education, and you'll also get exclusive / private 2-hour webinar time with me for the next 12 months. That's happening. And when you do that, you're going to be in there with a group of people. These are the people that sign up for the course. And you'll be able to, we'll discuss astrology. We'll discuss what's happening astrologically. If you have any questions about the course, we'll use that time where I can answer your questions. It's always good to send them ahead of time. And that's what you'll get. You'll get the 16-hour plus course plus the 2-hour webinar once a month, and you'll also get a chart, and you'll also get a natal report, which is about 35 pages telling you all about your natal chart. How about that? And we're talking $295, which by today's standards is a lot. Not money-wise, maybe for some people, but content-wise, that's a lot. That's a lot of content for, I would say, a modest sum. So go to Gumroads.com, look up 11th House Academy if you're interested in grabbing that. Everything is going to be happening by no later than Wednesday this week. Everything will be in order, all the content lined up, edited, ready to go. And we've got 16 hours edited, not shot, 16 hours plus edited. And when you go through the syllabus, you'll be able to see how everything unfolds in order. You just watch the videos in order. They're named. They're numbered numerically. So it's not random. You're taken through a whole sequence. It's exciting stuff. And I want to thank Ethan Lane, my co-producer on this event, who's been really great at putting it all together. You can also go to my website because there's a link to Gumroads on my website as well. So robertphoenix.com or Gumroads and look for 11th House Academy. It's exciting. We've been working on this for a while. People have asked about it. When are you going to do this? When are you going to do this? Well, it's here. And hopefully, knock on wood, it'll open a few doors and I can talk about this on other radio shows. Now I've got something that I can quote unquote sell, right? Well, funny that you mentioned it, George. I do have something that I've been working on. Hint, hint, George Norrie. Okay, let's get back into the show. and talk about this Brexit thing, because it's big news. Okay, so let me find I'm just going to read this. This is from the UK. This is a pretty good overview. This is from the Telegraph, my bad. The Telegraph.co.uk says, what happens now? The UK has voted Brexit, and what is Article 50? This is by Matthew Holhouse from Brussels. More than 3 years after David Cameron unveiled a strategy to reform Europe and put it to a referendum, Britain has voted to leave, and the Prime Minister has resigned. This is huge, folks. It is the greatest disaster to befall the bloc in its 59-year history. The road ahead is unclear. No state has left the European Union before, and the rules for exit contained in Article 50 of the Treaty of Lisbon are brief. Mr. Cameron resigned as Prime Minister shortly after 8 a.m., announcing that he thinks Britain should have a new Prime Minister in place by the start of the Conservative Conference in October. He will leave the task of triggering Article 50 to his successor. The EU's leadership has demanded Britain activate Article 50 exit talks as soon as possible, as they attempt to end the uncertainty over the bloc, however painful that process may be. President Tusk, President Schultz, Prime Minister Rutte met this morning in Brussels upon the invitation of European Commissioner President Juncker. Any delay would unnecessarily prolong uncertainty. No, they don't want uncertainty. The more uncertainty they have, the weaker their union begins to look. We have rules to deal with this in an orderly way. Of course you do. Article 50 of the Treaty on European Union sets out the procedure to be followed if a member state decides to leave the European Union. The official statement said, we stand ready to launch negotiations swiftly with the United Kingdom regarding the terms and conditions of its withdrawal from the European Union. Mr. Juncker does not look very happy. Mr. Schultz, on the other hand, he looks delighted. I wonder why he looks delighted. He's all smiles. Mario Draghi, the president of the European Central Bank, which basically means dragon, right? Draghi is dragon. Mario Dragon, the president of the European Central Bank, says it is ready to intervene to steady the market, so I'm sure it is. Central bankers from Japan and Switzerland have also offered to step in to provide additional liquidity, a measure not seen since the financial crisis. Financial crisis. On Saturday, the foreign ministers of the founding 6 member states, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Italy, and Belgium, will meet to discuss the implication of the British votes. The summit. David Cameron will next see his counterparts at a European Council summit on Tuesday and Wednesday next week. The deal struck after months of negotiation summer has evaporated under a self-destruct clause. He'll be under intense pressure to activate Article 50 and commence exit negotiations. Leaders do not want to be drawn into months and years of haggling over Britain's status. Out is out, Jean-Claude Juncker said on Wednesday. Get them out! By contrast, the official out campaign has said there is no need to trigger Article 50 until informal negotiations have taken place, potentially lasting years. Also on the agenda is a discussion of the migration crisis, including tentative proposals for compacts to speedily deport migrants back to Africa, and the current deployment of naval craft off Libya to intercept smugglers. Britain has a major role in this. A British warship is deployed in the EU's naval operation, and the second has been promised, but the crisis takes a back seat. So triggering Article 50, formally notifying the intention to withdraw, starts a 2-year clock running. After that, the treaties that govern membership no longer apply to Britain. The terms of exit will be negotiated between Britain's 27 counterparts, and each will have a veto over the conditions. So there are 27 nations that Britain has to negotiate with. It will also be subject to ratification in national parliaments, meaning, for example, the Belgian MPs could stymie the entire process. So even though the people of England have voted for Brexit, it doesn't necessarily mean it will happen in a smooth and orderly fashion. Two vast negotiating teams will be created, far larger than those seen in the British renegotiation. The EU side is likely to be headed by one of its current commissioners. Untying Britain from the old membership is the easy bit. Harder would be agreeing upon a new trading relationship, establishing what tariffs and other barriers to entry are permitted, and agreeing on obligations such as free movement. Such a process, EU leaders claim, could take another 5 years. Business leaders want the easiest terms possible to prevent economic harm. But political leaders say the conditions would be brutal to discourage other states from following suit. One option will be to simply recreate EU laws as British statutes. But civil service insiders expect the new Brexit government to opt out for something much more radical, to use the opportunity of throwing off the shackles to re-regulate Britain. This is a big blow to the globalists. I'm sorry. I don't care how it's spun, framed. It is a blow to the globalists. It means that the government would have to do 3 acts simultaneous: negotiate a new deal with Brussels, win a series of major bilateral trade deals around the world, and revise its own governance as EU law recedes. Running the show would be an effective ministry for Brexit under a senior minister. Officials expect the scrapping of EU law could result in an avalanche of new legislation in every corner of Whitehall, perhaps 25 bills in every Queen's speech for a decade. Boys and girls, this is a new country. This is a new country. This is the equivalent of the Berlin Wall falling. England, you've got a new country. What's fascinating about this is that Obama went to England to pitch for staying in the EU. This is a huge loss. I don't care how you spin it. It is a huge loss. The globalists took one in the nuts. How does this affect TTIP? Think about that. They need every single link in the chain for TTIP to be effective. England, Britain, is out of the EU. That is a major link out of the chain. Major. Not only has Britain redirected its sovereignty under the Cancer sun, hello Cancer, right? Continuity, organic, sovereign, loving, nurturing, the people spoke in Cancerian fashion. But it's also done a significant, and I mean a significant blow to the globalist plan to create a worldwide governance with the EU, the NAU, all these trade agreements, NAFTA, GATT. Boy, I hope that this is just the beginning of an avalanche. I hope, because the only chance that we have, and look, I am not, I've talked about the warts and boils on Donald J. Trump. I've talked about how he's untrustworthy. He's radical. He's mutable. But the one chance that we have is if Trump does become president, that he can ratify, or he can, not ratify, that he could go back into our agreement with Mexico, with NAFTA, or our agreement with Europe, with GATT, and begin to disassemble some of those agreements. Because the best thing that could happen to the people of Mexico, the absolute best thing that could happen to them, is if the globalists and the corporations and the 5 or 6 families that run the fucking country were put on notice that their people need to have a better standard of living, that their people need to be able to develop their own businesses, that their people need to get their land back, which was taken from them by the corporations after NAFTA was put into play. That would be the absolute best thing that could happen with a renegotiation of the NAFTA deal, maybe scrapping it entirely. How about that? How about that? And then what we could do is we could help build a better life for people inside of Mexico. Wow, what a concept. What a concept. Wouldn't it be great? Let's just throw this out there. Wouldn't it be great if life was so good in Mexico? So good. And there was such an incentive for people. Let's say, with all the money we spend on war, with all the money that we spend on all this superfluous bullshit, let's just say, for instance, we cut the budget for Israel in half for 1 year. Just for 1 year. So, you get to have it all again next year. For a year, we're going to take half of it. You know what we're going to do with that half? We're going to take that half and we're going to put it into a trust. And that trust is going to be for people that are inside Mexico currently, or families that are living inside the United States that were forced to live here. But guess what? If they wanted to, they could go back to Mexico and there would be a significant amount of money waiting there for them. So they could buy some land or start a business. Because not everybody from Mexico really wants to be in the United States. They don't. They're forced here in a lot of ways. Now all of a sudden, oh, guess what? Here's a real interesting creative solution. You mean I get to go back to Mexico? Yeah, you get to go back to Mexico. And you mean I get $100,000? Yeah, you get $100,000, but you got to be there. You have to be there, and that $100,000 is released over X amount of time, a year. You get $25,000 a quarter. You think people would want to go back to their own country? I think they would. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because what are we talking about here? We're talking about self-determination. We're talking about sovereignty. We're talking about self-reliance. I'll never forget having a conversation with my next door neighbor in California, in Albany. My next door neighbor was from Mexico. He had a farm in Mexico. He had animals. He had crops. He had the potential of a life, a good life. And what happened? NAFTA passed. And then what happened? The cost of everything went up. The cost of fuel, the cost of feed, everything went up. He couldn't afford his land anymore. He couldn't afford to have his lifestyle any longer. He had to sell. He had to leave. He came to the United States and moved to Chicago originally, and then went to the Bay Area, and he became a janitor. And then he became somebody who became a handyman. Wonderful guy. Loved him, loved his family. Used to go over there, used to eat their food, used to drink beer with him, used to watch telenovelas as a form of protest. His wife, who was crushed, absolutely crushed for leaving Mexico, said she would never learn English. You think he'd want to go back? You think if you said, hey, I got $100,000 or $200,000, you can go back and get some land and start your farm again, do you think he'd waste any time? Hell no. Why? Because he loves his wife. He wants his wife to be happy. They took away that man's ability to be self-determinate. They took away his sovereignty. And we're at a time now where it looks on the surface like the tide is turning. The best thing that we could do is to find ways to empower the people of Mexico financially and to get rid of the shackles of NAFTA, which has forced them out of their country and created a feeder-bleeder state in the United States. Could it happen? Possibly. If the EU and Britain could have a divorce, if there could be a Brexit, then we can theoretically have our own vote, have our own referendum so that we're out of NAFTA. How about that? How about those George Washington apples? It can happen. Let's put it out there. This is our new intention for this Friday. The last one seemed to work pretty well. We were having a very different discussion last Friday, weren't we? The world has changed. So let's put this out now. Again, through the operating principle of the third eye, we ask that nobody get hurt and damaged or maligned through this process. But what we are now seeking balance and rectification with our relationship with the globalists and the corporatists through reviewing NAFTA and either renegotiating or scrapping NAFTA altogether. Let's just scrap it. We want out. Let's go for the top. We want out. So this is the intention, to uncouple from NAFTA, to have new trade agreements that are ultimately in the best interest of every single American, every single Mexican national, to raise the quality and standard of both of our lives and to slow down the freight train of the corporate globalist excess, and to reconstruct a more organic network in nature for all of us to live our lives by, and to renegotiate our relationship with the dominant paradigm. All right, through love, right? Father, Mother, God, through the third eye, let's bring this into being. We did pretty well. We did pretty well at Brexit, I think. Let's take it to another level. Let this be the start of a new wave, a rising tide. So this Brexit piece is very, very, very powerful. Extremely powerful stuff. Remember, 23rd, 24th of June. Big times. Big times in the post-historical world, the post-20th century world. And not an easy time for Obama. A couple of major defeats. And Obama is not going to like it. He's a Leo. He is not going to be happy over the results. Trust me on this. I'm not sure what else we have to share about today's show, or in terms of content, what more we need to kind of cover. I don't have a lot more to say. I mean, usually I could probably ramble on for a couple of hours, but I don't think I'm going to do that. I think that we've taken the topic of the day, we've broken it down, and I think we've actually added a few other little pieces that I wasn't really prepared to talk about. But this is big stuff. Let's keep going. We're on a roll here. Let's keep going. Let's begin to hold the intention of the world that we want to create to the best of our ability. Let's keep holding that intention. This is the way that we can turn the tide. Trust me on this. And it's just started. It's just begun. Okay. What I want to do is I want to play one more piece for Barbara, and you can. She's got a foundation. If anybody is listening to this and knows Barbara, she has a foundation that she is started. It's a scholarship fund. So if anybody it feels like giving any money or donating to Barbara's passing, it's the Barbara Deal Imhoff. That's DIEHL, Barbara Deal Imhoff Foundation, and I'm sure your donations would be appreciated. So I'm going to play one more piece of music from her and the group that I was touring with, the Beasts of Paradise. That includes Stephen Kent on didgeridoo, Jeffrey Gordon, who is a member of the band, who's now deceased as well. So Jeffrey passed away about 4 years ago now, and he had a heart attack. He was driving on the way to Santa Fe to visit his daughter, had a heart attack. So Jeffrey playing percussion here, and Nancy McCusker on bass, and Eda Maxon on vocals. So this is Flickering Blue. You've been listening to the Friday FARcast. I'll be back on Sunday night. I promise I'll be back. Last Sunday night I was getting ready to travel, and I was completely whacked out by what happened with the Golden State Warriors. Wow. So in any case, I'll be back on Sunday night with the 11th house. And until then, use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay open to what's possible. Here's Beasts of Paradise, Flickering Blue. Barbara, love you. I can only imagine you're playing harp with the angels in heaven. I'll see you on Sunday night.
Evenings at home with a flickering sleep.